This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The sound of sporadic gunfire rattled through parts of Khartoum on Monday, and smoke was seen rising over the Sudanese capital. A statement by Sudan's Doctors Syndicate says at least 481 civilians have been killed in the city since fighting began last month. The number of wounded civilians has jumped to more than 2,500. The battle for control of Sudan erupted on April 15th after months of escalating tensions between the military and the rival paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces. Russia launched its biggest swarm of drones for months against Ukraine on Monday, the eve of Russia's May 9th holiday celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany. Reuters correspondent Emma Jaleh reports.
According to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, Russia fired 60 Iranian-made kamikaze drones at targets in Ukraine. 36 targeted the capital, all of which were shot down, he said.
Right now we're in an apartment, one of the buildings. Today was one of the massive attack to our hometown. 5 people was taken injuries, 2 people right now in hospitals, but nobody is died. It's very important.
The drone swarm is the latest in a renewed Russian air campaign launched 10 days ago.
Reuters correspondent Emma Jaleh. Tens of thousands of Serbians rallied in the capital Belgrade on Monday, demanding better security, a ban on violent content on TV, and the resignation of key ministers days after 2 separate mass shootings. Crowds in numbers not seen in the Balkan country for years solemnly marched through the city center behind a banner reading Serbia Against Violence. Find more on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. Ahead of May 14th polls, Turkey's pro-Kurdish Green Left Party says it's under siege, accused of links to separatists who have been fighting in the region for decades. For VOA, Dorian Jones reports from Diyarbakir, Turkey's largest majority Kurdish city.
Accounting for about a fifth of the population, the Kurdish vote is key to the outcome of May's presidential and parliamentary elections. This is especially so as the pro-Kurdish Green Left Party is now supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu against incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. With Kılıçdaroğlu vowing to free imprisoned Kurdish politicians and constitutional reform, the elections offers an opportunity for fundamental change. Given the high stakes, campaigning is intensifying with only days left before an election that many see as key to the country's future. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Diyarbakir.
The man accused of killing 8 people and wounding several others in a mass shooting at a suburban Texas shopping mall was discharged from the U.S. Army in 2008 because of mental health issues and apparently had been working as a security guard, according to neighbors and an Army official. Authorities on Monday were investigating what led to the attack Saturday near Dallas, which ended when police shot and killed the suspected 33-year-old gunman. According to an Army official who spoke on condition of anonymity, he was kicked out of the Army due to mental health issues. The driver who crashed into a crowd in the city of Brownsville, Texas, killing 8, has been charged with manslaughter. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Brownsville Police Chief Felix Sauceda says George Alvarez lost control of his Range Rover after running a red light, then plowing into a crowd of Venezuelans at a bus stop outside a migrant center.
George Alvarez is a Brownsville local with an extensive rap sheet. He has been formally charged and arraigned with 8 counts of manslaughter, 10 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He has received bonds totaling $3.6 million.
The police chief also says the 34-year-old tried to flee the scene, but witnesses held him and that he has not been cooperating. Authorities were still investigating whether the crash was intentional. I'm Julie Walker.
Canada struggled on Monday to control wildfires that have forced thousands to flee, halted oil production, and threatened to raze towns, with the western province of Alberta calling for federal help. Some 30,000 people were ordered to leave their homes over the past 3 days as more than 100 fires flared across the province, including 29 currently out of control. Federal disaster officials and the military were on standby, according to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The Sudanese Doctor Syndicate says tribal clashes over several days killed 25 people and wounded more than 50 in southern Sudan. It remained unclear whether the clashes were related to fighting between the country's military and a rival paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. At least 600 have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced since the fighting started in mid-April. Israel's Air Force hit Islamic Jihad targets in Gaza for a second day on Wednesday, and Palestinian militants in the enclave began launching rockets across the border. Reuters correspondent Edward Barn reports.
The military said it was trying to hit rocket sites preemptively as blasts rocked different points, including what witnesses described as a training camp in the northern part of the Gaza Strip and an open area in the south. Estisha Bellis lives in Tel Aviv.
It's frightening for both sides. It's frightening for us, to run to shelters. I recall the past, and that was terrible. And I think it's terrible for Palestinian children who don't have shelters as well. So I can feel for both sides, and it's a very, very sad situation.
Several were killed, medical officials said. Their identities were not immediately clear.
Reuters correspondent Edward Barn. U.S. officials will begin denying asylum on Thursday to migrants who show up at the Mexico border without first seeking protection in a country they pass through, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
We are making it very clear that our border is not open, that crossing irregularly is against the law, and that those who are not eligible for relief will be quickly returned.
Find more on our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. The World Health Organization says viral hepatitis, a potentially life-threatening infection, affects more than 350 million people globally every year and kills more than 1 million, and health agencies warn the disease is largely neglected and underfunded. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA from Geneva.
Hepatitis B is spread through sexual transmission and through contact with the blood, open sores, or body fluids from a person infected with the disease. However, the main mode of transmission is from mother to child during birth and delivery. WHO reports around 70% of hepatitis B infections worldwide occur in Africa, and 70% of those infected with the disease are children younger than 5. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
Riot police in Guinea's capital on Wednesday fired tear gas at anti-government protesters who were throwing stones and burning makeshift barricades to show their opposition to the ruling junta. The unrest is the latest in a string of protests since the government was overthrown in 2021 and replaced with military leaders who have dragged their feet on promises to hand power back to civilians. The leader of a Kenyan doomsday cult was denied bail on Wednesday. Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber reports.
A Kenyan court has denied bail for Paul Mackenzie, leader of the Good News International Church. He's accused of ordering followers to starve their children and themselves to death. Over 100 people have died. On Wednesday, his detention was extended by 30 days at a hearing in Mombasa. Meanwhile, the search continues for human remains in shallow graves scattered across a forest where Mackenzie's followers were living. The self-styled pastor surrendered to police on April 14th after police raided the forest, rescuing over a dozen people who were emaciated.
Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber. Long popular in Asia, floating solar is catching on as an energy source in the U.S., the AP's Ed Donahue reports.
Floating solar panel farms have been an attractive and affordable idea to get electricity for communities that don't have a lot of land. Shana White with Duke Energy says they're launching a small floating solar pilot in Bartow, Florida.
The floating solar is nice. We'll be able to use different bodies of water that aren't really used for recreational purposes.
The study published in the journal Nature Sustainability found thousands of cities, more than 6,000 in 124 countries, could generate an amount equal to all their electricity demand using floating solar. I'm Ed Donahue.
Follow us on the VOA mobile app or online at voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey.
Novak. This is VOA News. I'm Tommy McNeil.
Top U.S. diplomat in South Africa is accusing it of giving arms to Russia for the war in Ukraine. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani.
Ambassador Ruben Brigady says the U.S. is certain weapons and ammunition were loaded onto a Russian cargo ship secretly docked at a South African naval base in December. The South African government acknowledges a Russian vessel did dock there, but did not say why, and criticized Brigady for going public, saying there was a deal for U.S. intelligence services to provide any evidence for use in South Africa's own investigation. The government there says it has a neutral position on the war in Ukraine, but recent displays of closeness with Moscow have raised accusations it's effectively on Russia's side. Sagar Magani, Washington.
As the U.S. government braces for an influx of migrants at the U.S. border with Mexico after Thursday's expiration of a pandemic-era asylum policy, U.S. government officials are warning of the ramifications for crossing into the country.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, just hours before the lifting of a policy that blocked migrants from entering the country during the coronavirus pandemic, made a direct appeal to those thinking of or already heading north.
Do not risk your life and your life savings only to be removed from the United States if and when you arrive here.
The Biden administration faces criticism from both the political left, which says the government is now taking too harsh an approach to migration, and conservatives, who predict overwhelmed and unprepared U.S. officials will resort to a mass release of migrants. Steve Herman, VOA News, Washington.
The UN top human rights body has adopted a resolution concerning mounting civilian deaths and rights abuses in Sudan since the bloody conflict erupted between the African country's two top generals. This is VOA News. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that although he thinks his country's counteroffensive against Russia would be successful because of the number of projected Ukrainian casualties, the move is being delayed. VOA's Flashpoint Ukraine contributor Anna Chernikova.
What is discussed and what he's mentioning all the time, that Ukraine needs more jets and more long-range missiles.
And with that, British Secretary Ben Wallace announced Thursday that the UK is sending Ukraine long-range cruise missiles to help push back Russian forces. In addition, U.S. officials say the Abrams tanks needed for training Ukrainian forces have arrived in Germany slightly ahead of schedule and are on their way to the Army base where the training will begin in 2 or 3 weeks. Britain is reportedly preparing to designate the Wagner Group, a Russian private army that is deeply involved in the invasion of Ukraine, as a terrorist organization. Henry Ridgewell reports for VOA.
Russia's Wagner Group, a private army, is spearheading much of the fighting for the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Many of its mercenaries have been recruited from Russian prisons. Wagner is blamed for widespread atrocities in Ukraine, torturing and killing prisoners of war and civilians, including children, accusations it denies. Members of the group, including its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, are already subject to US, European Union and British sanctions. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Israeli aircraft destroy 3 houses apparently belonging to members of Islamic Jihad in northern and southern Gaza. The government's claims have been rejected by those who lived in the properties. AP correspondent Karen Chalmers tells us more.
Gathered by the rubble of a destroyed building in the enclave's southern city of Khan Yunis. It belonged to Jihad al-Agha, where she said she lived with her disabled husband and children. Another airstrike at a sprawling housing complex in Khan Yunis destroyed the upper floor of one of the buildings, where Israel said a senior commander was killed along with 2 others. The airstrike caused damage to 3 surrounding buildings. Resident Abdallah Hamid described an abnormal light and 2 explosions, and then finding his children crying in shock. When I reached them, I found them covering themselves with bed covers and screaming out of fear. Meanwhile, rocket fire towards southern Israel continued. I'm Karen Chamas.
Elon Musk says he's found a new CEO for Twitter, or X Corp as it's now called. Musk did not name the person, but said she will be starting in about 6 weeks. He bought Twitter last fall and has been running it since, but has been insisting he's not the company's permanent CEO. I'm Tommy McNeil, VOA News.